I'm going to do first is run through a bit of Stigma 101 in 10 minutes. This is the very, very abridged guide. And then we're going to have some examples from Marie, Violet and Teresa to show how we've used this in research. So, we seem to have some momentum on stigma. People are talking about it, people are using language, but we need to know how to create change. And we come to this conference and we talk fluent PCR, RNA, point of care, that's part of our language. Come on in, join in. We're going to force you later to go to one of these 5 tables, but you can sit anywhere you like. So we need the same kind of literacy and fluency in our understanding of stigma so that we can be very specific and precise and know what we need and want for change. So, this is where it all started with this guy called Goffman in the 60s, and he was very influential in defining at least the, come on in, the understanding of stigma from white industrialised countries. So he has this definition of stigma is when a person experiences when they are treated differently or expect to be treated differently because of some attribute that marks them as inferior. So the person is labelled as bad or dangerous or weak. That definition of stigma got stuck for a long time, decades, at that interpersonal level. It's about an individual. But I'm going to come back and talk about why it's not just the individual in a moment. Here's another really key definition from the literature from 2001, and what I really like is the 5th element of power. But what it says is to produce stigma, you need to understand something as different and label it that way. You produce negative attributes for that difference. They're worse or different or inferior because of that attribute. Separating people with that attribute and us, resulting in status loss and discrimination, but this can only happen in the context of power. So I can do those first 4 things, and the example I always go to is billionaires who send silly rockets to space. I can label them as different and stereotype them, but I have no power to make any difference to their lives whatsoever. In situations that we would all be familiar with, we can see where this power comes in. And the power is such a critical element. Hello, welcome, come on in. Power is such a critical element of stigma. Without it, it doesn't happen. So there's a quote at the bottom here saying, in the extreme, the stigmatised person is thought to be so different from us as to not really be human, and again in the extreme, all manner of horrific treatment of them becomes possible. And we can all think of examples, even here, of course, in Cape Town, of where all manner of horrific treatment of some people has occurred. So there are these 6 dimensions of the origins of stigma, which it's a lot to take in, but concealability, can you hide it? The course, how does it go over a lifetime? How disruptive is it? How repellent is it? Which is a very strong word. What's the origin? This one is really important. People are seen to be blamed for the situation that they find themselves in because they've made bad choices or seem to be made bad choices, or it's all at the individual personal responsibility, ignoring the structural elements that shape the choices and opportunities available to people. And peril, how dangerous a threat it poses. And again, really important in infectious diseases. They're a danger to me. The mental health literature also really worries about peril. People with mental health or mental illness are dangerous. So these 3 things, particularly, I think, are important for the kinds of work that we might find ourselves doing. Are people to blame? Are people to seen as a threat? And what about the aesthetic qualities, particularly of people who might have limited access to ability to bathe and look after hygiene? So we've seen some definitions, we've seen some origins. Hello, come on in. So now we're going to talk about some classifications. So as I said, this is just a really quick 10-minute go over this sort of stuff. So maybe you'll see different language in some other texts, but this picture kind of sums it up. Structural stigma, public stigma, self-stigma, stigma by association, and what's not here is intersectional stigma, which I'll talk about in a second. So public or interpersonal stigma, the negative attitudes and behaviours. This is usually the interpersonal stuff where people talk to each other and use bad derogatory language, or non-verbals that go, oh my God, I don't want to be close to you. Stigma by association, Teresa will give us some examples of this later. Experiencing secondary stigma because of a perceived connection to someone who is stigmatised. So as the example here, a mother of a child with ADHD may experience judgment about her parenting. Structural stigma, the rules, practices and customs that produce inequality. So when child protection conflates poverty with child neglect. And internalised or self-stigma, where people apply those negative labels that are floating about to their feelings of themselves. So the example here, of course, we don't endorse it, we're just using it as an example. I ruined my life the first time I took drugs and I'm to blame for what happened to me. Going back to that origin of blameworthiness. And intersectional stigma, which brings in a whole range of other aspects of one's life. Gender, class and race are the three primary categories that we think about with intersectionality, but also disability, poverty, well that would be wrapped up in class somewhat, gender, identity, sexuality, etc. So you're most welcome to have these slides. I'm very happy to email them to you, just drop me a bell. It's also important to think about understanding stigma at these various levels, the individual, the interpersonal, the organisational and the structural. That definition of Goffman got people stuck really for a long time at the interpersonal level. It's how people interact with each other. But all of this is shaped by how organisations are structured and the policies and practices within them, and how we talk about marginalised people at the structural level in our policies, in our laws, in our media. So understanding how the structural works shapes all these other levels. Again, some really excellent papers if people are interested about stigma power, that fifth element of definition of stigma. So these cultural ambient stereotypes that are around us all the time. We all grew up in the war on drugs. It infiltrates all of our understandings of drugs, people who use them, drug treatment. So those floating ambient stereotypes can harm stigmatised groups even in the absence of direct person-to-person discrimination. And these stereotypes can be buried in taken for granted aspects of culture. It's just the way it is that we don't let these types of people come in here. It's just the way it's always been done, because that's how our society works. So they can be hidden or misrecognised, both by people causing harm and those being harmed. So the power of stigma is to keep people down, to keep people in, and to keep people away. So recognising when these mechanisms of stigma are operating are really important, and that's where the importance of critical social science comes in, and the importance of lived experience and lived expertise that can highlight these inequalities that we just take for granted. So very quickly, I'm just going to run through some data to show you why this is important. So we have a stigma indicators program, and every couple of years we go and ask the community to help us fill out this data. So we ask people, in the last 12 months, have health workers treated you negatively or differently to other people? And pretty consistently, you can see these colours don't move very much. About 70% of people who inject drugs say, yes, I have been treated negatively or differently by a health worker in the last 12 months. When we ask people who inject drugs, what have you done in the last 12 months, or have you done any of these things to avoid being treated negatively by health services? Again, 60 to 70% of people routinely say they've done these things. I have not told a health worker about my drug use, I have delayed accessing health services, I have not attended a follow-up appointment, and I have downplayed my need for pain relief, and I've looked for different services. So this is where the impact on health comes from, that people make choices about what is important to them, partly because of fear of hostile services that they may be walking into. When we talk about these data, it's really important to stop and say we are focusing here on services and structures that are unattractive, harmful, unappealing for people who need to use them, and we're not focusing or putting any blame on the decisions made by people in very difficult circumstances. When we ask other groups, would you behave negatively towards people who inject drugs? So at the top line is the Australian general public, and just about 80% say yes, they would behave negatively towards someone who injects drugs just because of their injecting drug use. When we ask health workers, it's not that much better. It's about 70% of health workers say, I would behave negatively towards someone because they inject drugs. And we also have about 60% of health workers saying, I have witnessed someone who injects drugs being treated negatively in the health service. So, yes, we're all very focused on drug use, maybe HIV, maybe Hep C, but there are literally lots of other stigmas out there. And we've been very inspired by some work from the US that toted up 93 different health conditions, identities and practices that are stigmatised. Some of the examples are on the side here. I couldn't fit them all on the page. And in their work in the US of a general population sample, most people indicated that they lived with at least one of these things. So while we are very exercised about stigma in our sector, so are lots of others, and we could be forming allyships and relationships to bring a stronger voice to stigma reduction more generally. So what our centre is doing about it, and some of the literature is on your tables, at the front anyway, we're trialling a universal approach to stigma reduction in healthcare. We're running a Tackling Stigma conference next year. We ran one last year. We'll do it again next year. There's a QR code there. We have a Stigma in Healthcare short course, and we have a very exciting Stigma in Healthcare network that you can join. It's free. Come along, learn what other people are doing, contribute what the great stuff you're doing so that we can come together and learn and advocate together. Okay, I'm going to skip that because it's on your table there, and skip that, that's the short course, and skip that because the QR codes are there. And now I'm going to hand over to Marie to run through some of her work on narco-feminism in France.